Imagine a man, alone under the vast expanse of a starry sky, trembling in fear as whispers of divine judgment echo through his mind. The year is 701 BC, and the Assyrian army, led by King Sennacherib, has besieged Jerusalem. Inside the city walls, the people plead desperately for deliverance. Overnight, 185,000 Assyrian soldiers perish mysteriously. Was it an angel, divine intervention, or a plague? History remains divided, but one fact is undeniable: events tied to the divine often leave an indelible mark on humanity, shrouded in mystery and awe. Centuries later, another mysterious figure would emerge, a carpenter's son named Jesus, whose life, death, and resurrection continue to challenge historians and theologians alike. His birth was heralded by stars, his death accompanied by earthquakes, and his resurrection left an empty tomb that defied explanation. Could such stories be purely symbolic, or do they carry a divine truth waiting to be unveiled? Before the time of Jesus, before the prophecies of his coming echoed in the hearts of the faithful, there existed a world steeped in customs, traditions, and a fervent desire for connection with the divine. The ancient Israelites lived in a land shaped by their covenant with God, a bond that dictated every aspect of their lives. This was a time when the name one bore could dictate one's destiny. Names in Hebrew culture weren't merely identifiers, they carried profound meanings and, at times, served as prophetic markers. For example, Eliezer meant, "God is my help," a testament to divine reliance. Meanwhile, a name like Jabez, meaning sorrow or pain, could overshadow a life with misfortune. In this society, the people were deeply connected to their spiritual practices, which often revolved around their agricultural lifestyle. Every harvest was seen as a direct blessing from Yahweh, and rituals of thanksgiving were not optional, they were essential acts of devotion. Yet, this dependence on divine favor was coupled with an acute fear of divine judgment. Famine, disease, or war were often seen as direct consequences of disobedience. During these times, the Israelites adhered to strict codes of worship, sacrifices, and prayers. The tabernacle, and later the temple, served as the heart of their religious life, a place where heaven and earth seemed to touch. Their prayers weren't casual, they were carefully crafted and recited with an understanding of their spiritual weight. It was within this intricate web of faith and tradition that the story of Jabez begins to unfold. His life, though only briefly mentioned in the Bible, offers a timeless lesson about the power of prayer and the resilience of faith. Jabez's story is found in an unexpected place, hidden within the genealogies of 1 Chronicles, a book often overlooked due to its lengthy lists of names. But there, amidst the lineage of Judah, Jabez emerges as a beacon of hope. His prayer, profound in its simplicity, transcended the limits of his name and the pain it symbolized. Jabez was more honorable than his brothers. His mother had named him Jabez, saying, "I gave birth to him in pain." Jabez cried out to the God of Israel, "Oh, that you would bless me and enlarge my territory. Let your hand be with me, and keep me from harm so that I will be free from pain." And God granted his request. 1 Chronicles 4 verses 9 to 10. Why was this prayer so significant? Why did it stand out among countless others? To understand, we must explore not just the words Jabez spoke, but the world he lived in, a world where every action, every prayer, and every decision held eternal consequences. As we delve deeper into Jabez's story, let us remember this: history is filled with mysteries that defy human understanding. From miraculous deliverances to enigmatic prophecies, the divine often leaves traces in our world that challenge the limits of our comprehension. What could we learn from a man like Jabez, who dared to believe that a simple, heartfelt prayer could alter the course of his life? And so, we journey into the life of Jabez, a man whose name carried the weight of sorrow but whose faith carried him to unimaginable heights. Who was this man, and what can his prayer teach us about navigating life's greatest challenges? Stay with us as we uncover the story behind one of the Bible's most mysterious figures. What kind of man prays such a bold prayer, daring to ask God to rewrite the very fabric of his existence. Jabez's story is extraordinary not because of his circumstances, many in his time were born into suffering, but because of how he responded to them. In a world dominated by lineage, Jabez's name was both a reminder and a curse. His mother's pain during childbirth became his lifelong identity. In Hebrew, Jabez is derived from a root word meaning sorrow or pain. Imagine introducing yourself, only to have your name immediately conjure images of misery and hardship. This wasn't just a personal burden, it was a social one. Yet, Jabez stands out as a man described as more honorable than his brothers. The Bible doesn't tell us what made him honorable, but perhaps it was his willingness to rise above his circumstances. He wasn't defined by his name or his past. Instead, he chose to define himself by his faith and trust in the God of Israel. In the culture of the ancient Israelites, names often carried prophetic significance. Isaac, for instance, means, "he laughs," a nod to Sarah's disbelief and joy at his birth. Moses means, "drawn out," referencing his rescue from the Nile. But Jabez? His name was a shadow, a weight pulling him down. And yet, he refused to let it dictate his future. Jabez's prayer wasn't long or complicated, but it was revolutionary in its intent. "Oh, that you would bless me." A cry for divine favor, not just material wealth but the richness of God's presence in every area of life. "Enlarge my territory." More than land, this was a request for influence, opportunity, and growth, physically, spiritually, and relationally. "Let your hand be with me." A plea for God's guidance and protection, acknowledging his dependence on divine wisdom. "Keep me from harm so that I will be free from pain." A direct challenge to the destiny imposed by his name, asking God to rewrite his narrative. What stands out about this prayer is its audacity. Jabez didn't focus on his limitations. He didn't lament his suffering or his name. Instead, he looked to the limitless power of God. This prayer also reveals something profound about Jabez's relationship with God. It wasn't transactional or superficial. He didn't ask out of entitlement but from a place of deep trust and faith. This is the kind of faith that moves mountains, not because of the size of the request but because of the size of the God being asked. What would your prayer look like if you truly believed God was listening? Let us know in the comments below, and if this story inspires you, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to our channel, and share your thoughts. Could the prayers of an ancient people still hold lessons for our modern world? Join us as we uncover the spiritual heartbeat of Jabez's era and discover how his example can inspire us to seek more from life. To fully understand the depth of Jabez's prayer, we must immerse ourselves in the spiritual and cultural fabric of his time. The era of Jabez was one of transition and tension, a time when faith was not just a private practice but a communal identity, deeply intertwined with every aspect of life. The Israelites were a people defined by their covenant with Yahweh, a binding promise that set them apart from surrounding nations. This covenant was not merely a spiritual agreement, it shaped their laws, customs, and societal structure. Their worship revolved around the tabernacle, a portable sanctuary where sacrifices were offered, prayers were lifted, and God's presence was believed to dwell. Later, this practice would centralize in the majestic temple built by Solomon. However, Jabez's time likely fell before the establishment of the temple, during an age when the Israelites were still navigating their identity in the Promised Land. This was an era marked by frequent clashes with neighboring tribes like the Canaanites, Philistines, and Moabites, who introduced competing religious practices. Baal worship, fertility rituals, and idolatry were constant temptations, threatening to pull the Israelites away from their God. It was within this complex spiritual landscape that Jabez lived, a man burdened by a name that symbolized sorrow but surrounded by a culture that understood the power of prayer and divine intervention. Faith and fear in daily life. For the ancient Israelites, every aspect of life was spiritual. The rain that watered their crops, the victories in battle, and the health of their children were seen as direct reflections of their relationship with God. Disobedience was believed to invite divine judgment in the form of drought, famine, or invasion. This worldview created a deep reliance on God but also an acute awareness of their fragility. Daily life was filled with rituals that reinforced this dependence. Families observed the Sabbath, offered sacrifices, and celebrated feasts like Passover and Sukkot. These practices weren't mere traditions, they were acts of survival, both spiritual and physical. To neglect them was to risk not only social ostracism but also divine punishment. Jabez, however, chose a different path. While others might have resigned themselves to a life of sorrow, dictated by the meaning of their name, Jabez took a bold step. He prayed, not for survival, but for transformation. A bold prayer in a traditional world. Jabez's prayer was radical because it defied the conventions of his time. Most prayers in ancient Israel focused on communal needs, protection from enemies, blessings for the harvest, or forgiveness for the nation's sins. Individual prayers, while not unheard of, were rare in biblical accounts. Yet, Jabez's prayer was intensely personal. Consider the audacity of his words. "Bless me indeed." In a culture that often equated material wealth with divine favor, Jabez's request for blessings went beyond the tangible. He sought the richness of God's approval, a sign that he was not defined by his past but by God's promise. "Enlarge my territory." This wasn't just a plea for land but for influence and opportunity. In a time when land was tied to survival and legacy, this request was both practical and visionary. "Let your hand be with me." This line reflects a deep understanding of dependence on God. Jabez wasn't asking to succeed on his own, he wanted God's guidance every step of the way. "Keep me from harm so that I will be free from pain." This final plea directly confronted the curse of his name. It was a request for God to intervene and rewrite his story. Lessons from Jabez's spiritual context. Jabez's story isn't just a narrative about a man defying his circumstances, it's a window into the spiritual practices and struggles of his time. His prayer highlights several timeless truths. Faith requires action. Jabez didn't wait for his circumstances to change, he actively sought God's intervention. This reflects the broader biblical principle that faith is not passive but proactive. God values the individual. In a culture focused on the collective, Jabez's personal prayer reminds us that God sees and cares for each person individually. Transformation begins with boldness. Jabez dared to ask for more, not out of greed but out of faith. His prayer challenges us to examine the limits we place on our own requests to God. To truly appreciate the prayer of Jabez, we must step outside of the ancient world and consider how his bold words transcend time, resonating even in our modern context. The beauty of his prayer lies not only in its simplicity but in its universality. It's a plea that cuts across generations, cultures, and circumstances. But what exactly makes this ancient, seemingly obscure request so timeless and relevant to us today? Let's shift our perspective. Imagine Jabez's prayer as more than just a personal plea, it's a roadmap, a blueprint for how to approach God with faith and confidence. In the modern world, we are surrounded by complexity, distractions, and a constant pressure to achieve more. In this chaotic landscape, Jabez's prayer offers clarity, focus, and a reminder of where true power and transformation come from. Bless me indeed, reclaiming the meaning of blessings. In our contemporary lives, the word blessing is often thrown around casually, associated with material wealth, good fortune, or social media hashtags. But Jabez's prayer challenges us to go deeper. His cry for blessings wasn't about accumulating riches or achieving temporary success, it was a profound request for God's presence, favor, and guidance in his life. Modern believers can learn from this perspective. A true blessing isn't just about what we receive but about aligning ourselves with God's will. Jabez teaches us to ask for blessings that go beyond surface-level desires, focusing instead on things that carry eternal significance, peace, wisdom, strength, and purpose. What if we reframed our prayers today, shifting from, "Give me what I want," to, "Give me what I need to fulfill your purpose"? Jabez's example invites us to see blessings not as an end goal but as tools for transformation. Enlarge my territory, redefining influence and impact. When Jabez asked God to enlarge his territory, he wasn't just asking for land. For the ancient Israelites, land was deeply symbolic. It represented inheritance, legacy, and the ability to thrive. But for Jabez, this request was also a cry for greater responsibility, influence, and opportunity. In a modern context, this part of the prayer resonates on multiple levels. Territory can symbolize the spheres of influence we have in our families, workplaces, communities, and beyond. It challenges us to think about how we use the opportunities we're given. Are we seeking to grow not for selfish gain but to serve a greater purpose? This line of Jabez's prayer also confronts our fears of stepping out of our comfort zones. Growth, whether spiritual, emotional, or professional, often requires us to take risks and trust God in the unknown. Jabez's faith reminds us that asking for expanded opportunities comes with the responsibility to act with integrity and courage. Let your hand be with me, dependence over independence. In today's world, independence is often celebrated as the ultimate goal. We're encouraged to make it on our own and to rely on personal strength and ingenuity. But Jabez's prayer flies in the face of this mindset. By asking for God's hand to be with him, he acknowledged his utter dependence on divine guidance. This part of the prayer is a profound reminder that no matter how capable or self-sufficient we believe we are, true success comes from walking hand in hand with God. The hand of God, in biblical imagery, often signifies power, protection, and provision. Jabez's humility in asking for this divine partnership is a lesson for us today. Real strength is found in surrender, not in self-reliance. In our prayers, do we seek to include God in our plans, or do we only turn to him when things go wrong? Jabez's consistent faith challenges us to rely on God's presence at every step, trusting that he will guide us through both triumphs and trials. Keep me from harm so that I will be free from pain, breaking free from the past. Perhaps the most poignant part of Jabez's prayer is his plea for protection and freedom from pain, a direct contradiction to the meaning of his name. This was more than a physical request. It was an emotional and spiritual cry to break free from the shadows of his past. Many of us carry burdens from our past, regrets, traumas, or labels placed upon us by others. Like Jabez, we long to be free from those things that hold us back. His prayer shows us that it's not only possible but also essential to seek God's intervention in rewriting the narratives of our lives. This line also serves as a reminder that God doesn't just transform our external circumstances, he works within us to heal wounds, restore hope, and renew purpose. Jabez's faith challenges us to believe that we, too, can be liberated from whatever pain or limitations we face. Timeless lessons for modern believers. Jabez's prayer resonates deeply because it reflects the human experience, the desire for purpose, the need for divine connection, and the hope for transformation. But more than that, it offers a practical framework for prayer. Ask boldly, don't hold back in your prayers. God honors those who trust him with their deepest desires. Seek alignment, let your prayers reflect not just your wants but God's greater plan for your life. Depend on God, recognize that true success comes from his presence, not your own strength. Embrace transformation, believe that God can and will rewrite your story when you surrender it to him. But Jabez's story doesn't end with his prayer. It raises a profound question: why did God grant his request, and what does that mean for us? Join us in the final chapter as we explore the enduring impact of Jabez's faith and how his legacy invites us to live boldly today. Jabez's story isn't just an inspiring tale from ancient history, it's a mirror, reflecting back at us our own fears, desires, and relationship with God. If Jabez could rise above a name that symbolized pain and boldly ask for God's intervention, why do so many of us settle for less? Why do we allow fear, doubt, or even apathy to silence our prayers. Take a moment to consider, when was the last time you prayed with true conviction? Not a quick, half-hearted request or a superficial plea, but a prayer that laid bare your deepest hopes, dreams, and fears. Have you ever dared to ask God to enlarge your territory, to take you beyond your comfort zone and into a life that stretches the limits of your faith? Why God granted his request? Here's the most remarkable part of Jabez's story: God granted his request. The Bible doesn't tell us how or when, but it's clear that Jabez's boldness, faith, and humility moved the heart of God. And this is where it gets personal. What's stopping God from granting your request? Is it fear? A lack of faith? Or perhaps you've convinced yourself that God doesn't care about the details of your life. Jabez's story obliterates that lie. It shows us that God not only hears but also responds to those who approach him with trust and courage. But here's the catch: faith requires action. Jabez didn't just pray, he believed and lived in alignment with the God he prayed to. Are you doing the same? Or are you letting the weight of your past, the limits of your imagination, or the opinions of others hold you back from experiencing the fullness of what God has for you? Your life, your prayer. Think about your own life for a moment. What would your prayer look like if you truly believed God was listening? Would it be as bold as Jabez, or would it be limited by your doubts? Now ask yourself, what's the worst that could happen if you prayed like Jabez? The truth is, most of us never even get to that point because we're too afraid to dream, too scared to believe, or too comfortable with mediocrity. But here's the reality: if you're not praying boldly, you're not living fully. Jabez didn't settle for the life he was handed, and neither should you. The challenge. As we close this chapter, I want to leave you with a challenge, a simple yet profound question to carry with you. What if the life you're living isn't the life you were meant for? What if God is waiting for you to take that first step, to pray that bold prayer, to trust him with your greatest hopes and fears? Let this be the moment you decide to stop holding back. If Jabez could rise above a name of sorrow and claim a life of blessing, what's stopping you from doing the same?